Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today to kick off our Pride Month celebration, myself and Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp are reviewing Derek Jarman's Edward II. This really interesting historical take on the story of Edward II is quite explicitly queer in the best of ways, and both myself and Jack had a lot of fun breaking this down and describing why we think Jarman is such a fantastic director and important queer voice. This is a great discussion. We really get into the context the film was made in, both politically and within Jarman's actual life, and we share different theories and ideas on what this film actually is trying to say and what impact it has on society today. Jarman is a filmmaker that I think gets greatly overlooked, and I'm so happy that finally here on the podcast we can dedicate an entire episode of breaking down one of his best films as we kick off again what should be a great month of looking at queer cinema and queer voices on film. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Now let's get to our review of Edward II. Okay, Jack, thank you so much. As the former host of our initial Pride special, never gonna let you live that one down. Thank you so much for joining me to kick off our Pride celebration this June with a review for Derek Jarman's Edward II, a film I was really excited to check out. I know I'm a pretty big Derek Jarman fan. Last year, I really dived into a lot of his work. Don't necessarily know if you have a lot of history with him, but I know he's at least a filmmaker you've been aware of. So I guess I'll turn it over to you first. Just what is your history with Jarman? Do you have any history with this filmmaker? And then what are your thoughts on Edward II?
Well, thank you for bringing up that initial Pride Month special we did. Yeah, thanks for bringing that one up. Weirdly enough, like when we had the discussion about George Méliès and Fritz Lang, well, not so much Fritz Lang, but especially George Méliès, Derek Jarman has come up somewhat often in my lifespan of the cinematic landscape, but he's not particularly someone I've ever really been engrossed with or engaged with, purely because in Britain, he's a very interesting figure in artistry as an activist, which during his tenure was probably considered to be, not the thing to be if you want to be part of the establishment. And second, he's sort of gone into the mythos now. And I don't know about you. You probably know this a bit more than me. I know that the BFI Blu-ray released 2 volumes of his work remastered on Blu-ray. They are absolutely like gold dust to buy. If you've got one of them, keep them. They will go up in value, something shocking. They're so difficult to buy. And I've got the BFI Alan Clark box set, and I could only buy them both on DVD, and they're just out of print now. So Derek Jarman's a very interesting one. To be able to access now is limited, although I think he's definitely coming to his own. My first discussion about Derek Jarman, weirdly enough, was a screening of one at college when I was about 18, when we watched Eraserhead. We were talking about film theory, I think, and about production design and all that sort of stuff. And I think I've spoken about this story about like how we would look at. I think I actually said this on the David Lynch tribute, so I won't go too much into it. But we just looked at these images and we had to respond to them and what we thought it wasn't. And one of the shooters brought up Blue, Derek Jarman's Blue, and I'd never heard of it. And he described it like a 90-minute blue screen, and can you make and it's like purposely, because he was very much into fine arts, like the type of artistic cinematic landscape more so than like the commercial that everyone thought they were going to go into. I remember him saying like you watch it for so long and you can get transfixed into seeing images on screen that are not there. I was like, oh well, this is interesting. Derek Jarman, and then it just sort of got forgotten about because you get into your Kubricks and your Scorseses and obviously so on and so forth. And then weirdly enough, it came back up about 4 years later when I was at university. I don't know, this story's got a point. And there was one student who in our class called Edwin Miles. Edwin probably won't listen to this show, but Edwin's I think him and Nick know each other. I don't know if they know each other very well. I know they're aware of each other. Edwin's an incredibly talented short filmmaker. Like he's like a comparison of Ken Loach, Kitchen Sink, and Derek Jarman. And he does like this dreamscape forum that goes into like his youth. Like he gets video camera footage that his granddad shot, like Christmases and birthdays, or just like in 1994 where they would be randomly. And he puts in like this short form content really well respected filmmaker. Anyone out there, you should go watch some Edwin stuff. Um, yeah, Edwin Miles, really nice guy as well, really talented filmmaker. And I remember he was obsessed with Derek Jarman. I think he's done a podcast with the cinematologists on Derek Jarman as well. And I remember like he was always associated with it. Like a massive fan of his. And really, that's where it stopped for me. I was always aware of him, but I didn't know. I know that was incredibly important for the gay rights movement in England. I know that there's like he's infamous in the country for living near a nuclear power station when it was decommissioned in a small cottage. Like he's just mythos now. Um, so I'm going to say this out loud. I can't believe I've said this. This is my first Derek Jarman film, so I'm really happy to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you about it because obviously this is a filmmaker that will not today. I guess probably will speak to a more of an inner you than it will of me, which I'm fascinated to know to your response, especially the American Englishisms of it all. I'm fascinated because I can come at a certain area of the English establishment, and you can come at more a thematic and a personal note on Jarman himself. So I'm fascinated. This is my first Jarman. I'm here with Carson Timar on ClapperCast. I can't wait to get educated and schooled. I've already been berated for the Pride Month thing, but I'm so happy to be here. So this was my first Derek Jarman, and this was a brilliant entry. Brilliant. I think if this is anything to go by, I can't wait to watch some more stuff. Like him and his muse Tilda Swinton as well. I'm fascinated to know. So
Wow, what a great introduction to have for Jarman also. Definitely all those things you mentioned. He's definitely not afraid to throw his entire filmography. And I'd recommend anyone go seek out this filmography. I know some of them are harder to find than others, and it's a big filmography. I've definitely not seen everything. But there's a lot of great stuff here. Like Sebastian, Blue is obviously this incredibly profound statement on the verge of death and reflecting on the AIDS crisis. The Tempest, I'm a big Shakespeare adaptation fan, and I think The Tempest, his version of The Tempest, is brilliant. Probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite version of that story I've seen. This is my favorite Derek Jarman film. This is my first time watching it. Blown away by this film. Um, I mean, to be clear, I think the idea on paper is always going to resonate with me with taking this historical figure, this historical story, putting it in context of not just at the time through the 90s, but there's also stuff about queerness in the 40s and putting all these time periods together and kind of squishing them to morph into a different story and into just like this dreamlike sequence. That's this entire film where you're jumping between eras, you're jumping between perspectives. But very, very emotionally moving, very emotionally mature. I think this is probably Jarman at some of his most brutal. I guess just I want to keep it kind of initial here with my opening thoughts, so I don't want to get too into specifics. But the production design here, I mean, the sets they use, I think, are absolutely spectacular. You look at Derek Jarman in the 1990s, early 90s, and I also think it's interesting for us to have this conversation just because of two very different cultural understandings, right, with the UK and with America, as far as gay liberation and how you discuss these topics and what you're allowed to say. But having scenes of cops tearing down activists fighting for gay rights and for the AIDS crisis at this time in the early 90s, broadcasting that with also questions of monarchy and queerness within monarchy, showing the tenderness of queer love. I mean, there's so many smaller moments here of tenderness. It is a film that is just so, I found it just be purely like speaking to my heart and like just evoking empathy and creating emotion in a way that is really, really campy at times. It's really fun at times. It's really sad at times, really violent at times. It's just, I think this is the best showcase of all the sides of Jarman squished into one with just such a clear vision. I really love this film. Like I said, I mean, I gave this 5 stars. I'll just be transparent. This is my favorite of Jarman's film. So I'm so excited that this is what you get to see for your introduction also, and that we get to talk about this today. Normally I watch these types of films on my own and I'm like, oh wow, I'd love to do a ClapperCast on those.
yeah.
And I gotta watch it and then I was like, oh, I get to go do a ClapperCast on it. So it's a pretty easy day for me, I will say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's having an understanding of obviously Jarman's history and knowing a bit about him, obviously not watching his films. There's two integral pieces, isn't there? There's Blue at the end of his life, which is a sort of thought processing, fine art depiction of his consciousness put on screen in a dying era of himself going on to a different place, as well as his previous entries having issues with what's happened to England, specifically the political appointment. And this is at the same time where Alan Moore comes in the late 80s with Watchmen and V for Vendetta. The Conservatives are at a massive swing here. So the late 80s, well, the middle of 80s and the early 90s in England. Bear in mind that I'm not a political pundit, but from being aware of the initial and long-lasting implications of this, is a Tory government in England, which is a Conservative government, which is brought forward and maintained by Margaret Thatcher, who in this country is incredibly divisive. For someone who makes a class system and then privatizing and not national, and then nationalizing some things and then privatizing others, trying to make money for people, and then taking decommissioning the miners, the coal mines up north, which puts the likes of Newcastle and and multiple places like it on the brink. Unemployment rises by a mass amount. She's not very well liked in the union spaces of Liverpool and Newcastle. And this is a time where homosexuality is illegal, where there are medical interventions on sexuality here, where you can't get married. Still, I believe it's still illegal at this point, but I could be wrong there. So this is a time within England from the 60s. The swing 60s have definitely gone. The 70s have style and have been bravado. We go into the 80s where we go to war in the Falklands. We come out of that at a very difficult time. We enter the 90s, a technological age where we seem to suffer. We go into recessions, so on and so forth, and unemployment is massive. And the social wars and the culture wars begin to really take precedent here. And I think with Jarman being gay and also being an activist on a cinematic landscape, independent film here has got a very interesting voice, because our independent cinema probably comes out maybe 20, maybe 10, 15 years before yours does in a boom of your Tarantinos, your Miramaxes. Ours is probably just more on an independent spectrum in general. It's a far lesser industry than let's say yours is in terms of volume. But it's interesting to know that Jarman's going through a lot here. He's dealing with the repercussions of a government who doesn't see him as a citizen, as a first-class citizen, who doesn't respect or accept his sexuality, who doesn't respond or accept his cinematic artistry. And there's also then the factor that he could be sterilized for his sexuality, which he's born with. All the while, the Conservative government are taking more money from the pot, more money from pot, and we're going through it. We've just gone through it the last few years of Rishi Sunak. There's about 6 of them in like the space of 4 years. Unlike you, where you have 4 years and you technically could have 8, we have 7 as a term. Whether it's not a general election or a by-election, then we go to a 14. So austerity in our country is a little bit different to yours, but it's a mass amount. Like there's a terminology where the country fell with the Thatcher government. Everything changed. Anyway, long story short, getting back to Jarman, it's an interesting to watch this because you look at there's a few pieces of his filmography beforehand where he touches on it, but this one feels like a genuine call out to those. Of a government, a political standing, a social standard, and a double standard, where treason, sexual prowess is one for one and not for the other, and I think Jarman does a really good job of that here, where we watch someone indulge with it because he's a military man, and obviously because we expect because he's a military man and he's strong, these vices. Yet he's like a sado, like some of a fucking Hellraiser at times. We sort of socially or consciously accept that because that's right. But when we look at the more tender, more sort of like is it not a tender like a romance of the King and Gaveston. It's interesting how he presents the two as one is forbidden and one is sort of like somewhat allowed, whereas the vice is sexuality and the other one is sort of like sexual tendencies, which I just found was interesting as well. But I think Jarman really does take some stripes here. I think he really does sort of take a lot of weight here and deconstructs it. I think it's very interesting. You can read into this quite a lot with the Tilda Swinton character. Obviously, you've got the Shakespeare template here, which I think I love it when they do stuff like this. I love it when there's we go from the passage of time of a really herald piece of scripture or a writing, and they modernize it or twist it. And the British or the European thing is so interesting. Like you've got Richard III, which is Ian McKellen, which is a BFI thing. Another very interesting feature, tremendous. This you also have like the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet and things like that. I love the modernization of it, or the twist, keeping things relevant, like the long sword on the guns. I love that touch on Baz Luhrmann. But I think this is like very similar to it. I just think it's interesting. Like you don't really need that narrative, but it does work. Again, I know I'm rambling here, so I'll move it on to you in a second. But again, I think it's fascinating how he melds his position now with the material that works then, and takes a few bodies with him. And I think this is an incredible piece of like activist as well. Like you said, very grimy, very difficult to watch at times. I'm not talking about like sexual depiction. I think this is the least of the things that's just a concern here at all. But it's far interesting how you have like quite difficult things to listen to and watch and stuff like that. It's an interesting piece. I'll throw it back to you, but it is a great standing point. But he takes a lot here with what's going on. And at this time as well, he's dying as well. Like he's coming to terms with his HIV, which is turning to AIDS, which is sort of like there's no cure, no hope. The Americans are not bothered with the Reagan administration that's just gone. You know, they're not bothered at all. They're demonized as people who are not even human at this point in time. It's horrific in the States, and in the British are not going to be any fucking better at this time. The Conservatives. He's got no help. He sees no future. He knows he's dying, and I think this is the one big swan song where it's like this is anger, this is venom. Whereas Blue feels more like the opposing figure to that, a yin and a yang. There's an anger and frustration and a nastiness, and then with Blue there's an acceptance and stoicness and an emotional thematic representation of acceptance. You know, losing as also like as an artist, as a painter, as a visionary, losing his eyesight as well, and seeing the greys here. This is devoid of so much fucking color, so much like fragrance. Let's say visual fragrance. It's a very compelling piece of work. One that behind the surface holds a significant amount of generous texture and richness, which with Jarman feels like a staggering amount of weight.
No, I mean, I love how pointed Jarman can be. I haven't seen it, but Jubilee is one of his films where he sends the first Queen Elizabeth to 1970s England,
Yes.
and like plays with that a lot. I always think, I think so much of film, especially modern film, is so limited in just imagination. Jarman always makes the best choice to convey an emotion or convey a vibe or convey an idea, no matter if it's logical or not with time periods, as you mentioned. Like he's just never concerned with that. And I think that paints such a wonderful cinematic texture and language to every scene. The fact that, yes, it is, you know, taking place in these times, but they can just smoke a cigarette if they need, or various things. I go back to the conversation we had weirdly on Ridley Scott's Napoleon, where like, I cannot believe someone could watch that film and their takeaway be like, oh, they read a newspaper that was not present at the time. Like, it just feels so weird to view cinema
Yeah.
in that way, and I appreciate Jarman for that, and his artistry throughout. No, I mean, I think this film is super, super pointed in a lot of ways. There's a lot here about trying to cure homosexuality.
Mm.
Obviously, that is a huge thing, whether it is trying to get rid of the influence, that is obviously something big, tempts them with a woman again, and it doesn't work out, obviously, because you can't choose to be gay. You can't fix someone being gay. That's all super pointed, I thought. I also really, there's this idea present throughout of like, I guess it's a dual idea with the fact that Edward in his position is gay. The first idea is like, you can even be the king and that's not going to be accepted, right? Like, society will find a way to attack you, to hurt your love, to try to force your hand, to threaten to remove you from the crown. You cannot be, there's no position where you are safe from that within society. There's also a message here throughout about like, and I guess this is really the issue for conservatives, right? This is the issue for straight people, is that gay people and queer people and trans people will still just exist because people are just queer. This is true with Edward. This is true with actually Edward at the end, different Edwards, is the fact that no matter what they do to try to silence or put a cap on this queerness continues to push. Again, I also think it's super, super, like, cannot be overstated how poignant it is to have the gay civil rights activists be so relevant again to this time in the early 90s, to put that action scene almost with them and towards the end. Jarman, and he is, again, as you mentioned, it's also wild to be like, he's towards the end of his career, he's losing vision, all this stuff, and he's still such a prolific filmmaker. He's making like film after film after film after film. But there's just this sense of like, there's no holding back. There's no one he's unafraid to touch. There's no statement he's unafraid to make. And I think this film really does a wonderful job at building all that together and creating it in a way that's very, very digestible and very, very, it all works, right? I don't think there's any conversation here because there's a lot in here. There's a lot of different topics in here. There's no conversation that cannibalizes each other. But again, I also love that he just keeps going back to those tender moments. There's a lot here about just this anger, this visceral anger and hatred towards from people, even close to him, who doesn't want the sexuality. And he's literally this leader you mentioned, this military guy, who's this guy who has all these kinky stuff, but he literally lays there in bed surrounded by naked women. And he cannot stop just thinking and cannot stop hearing the actions of Edward and his love, and just thinking that they're provoking him based on nothing. When they're just sharing these tender moments together, there's a great song sequence within this. That's a really, really emotional dance that I found to be really moving. But there's also a bit of like, again, as you mentioned, or as you alluded to, there's a contradiction here of being like, well, Edward, you are sexually perverse because you are having sex with this guy, when he is engaging, this military guy is engaging in sadomasochism. But also you have a lot here of like women kissing and the sexualization of women kissing by these straight men, who don't seem to have an issue with that per se when it's in a certain context, but then have an issue with just queer people existing. It is a very, very pointed film. And I think if you've not seen the film at home and you're hearing us describe it, all this might seem a little bit basic, right? I think that is something that you could look at this and say these are basic statements. I really cannot get over how like magnificent the delivery is here, how dreamy it is, how effective it is. Also, again, the violence and how this film uses violence against the body, how it uses death, how it uses, it's not even like all glamorous deaths where it's this big bloody sequence. There are some really tragic deaths that are just a simple snap of the neck. Or there's one that is very, very gruesome towards the end. It has such a vision to it where I think that if you were listening to this and you're like, well, that seems kind of basic from the 90s, like, no, you definitely should check this out. Like, I think this holds up to any of the queer cinema we've gotten since. Like, I think this is very, very profound in a lot of ways, but also in a way, and I'm curious, I don't know your opinion on this because you're straight. How do you think straight people would react to? Do you think that this is a statement that would speak to people who maybe are not convinced that they should support gay people? Like, what do you think this film's role is within, I guess, the statements Jarman's actually trying to make?
That's the interesting one, because that's another debate in itself. I think people who are indoctrinated into hating others for the colour of their skin and sexuality, I don't think you can convince those people, because there's hatred behind that is soaked into their being, which, if it's tragedy or if it's circumstance or it's poison from being a child, there are layers so deep that I just think there's no chance on this earth, aside from a divine intervention, that will change those people's thoughts. And I think the tragedy of it is that those people often are looking for the incentive to be that angry, to be that divisive, to be that bitter and vile. I think a lot of people in their lives want a scapegoat, and I think, why not? I think a lot of people go for sexuality because that person can only defend it in the sense, well, I was born with it. There's no like, without being out of phrase here, there's no quote unquote excuse for it. So the person's who sort of like, they're trying to find an issue with that, and the response they get is a very valid one. Like, that's who I am. Yeah, but it can't be as simple as that. And I think that sort of repels the person back to want to fight it more, to then change that person's opinion. It's a very fucked up, strange psychoanalysis of people who are just blatantly sexist, transphobic, homophobic, racist. It's a strange one. I think with this film, from my point of view, I don't think Jarman is doing this to sort of surrender the film to those people and say, like, look, these are people. I think he's far out done with that. I don't think he gives a shit. I don't think he's bothered about those to try and to turn their opinions. I think, and it goes back to your point about, this film is so simplistic, and I cannot say that it's a bona fide brilliance. It is everything around, from production design, stage design, blocking, costume. Everything is simple. Clutching pearls. The set is like a prison. It's a figurative and literal imprisoning of these people who cannot escape their own greeds, lusts, romanticisms, who can't play against the agenda they're meant to play for. It's it's so simplistic, but it can work with it. I mean, in the first scene where Tilda Swinton is, I read this as well, she has a handbag that costs more than the sets. $3,500 costs more than the sets. You know, they're working with limitations at Brood, and that's Jarman. It's a painter. He sees the image. What can we get from it? I think it works perfectly. But I think, going back to the point what you said, though, I think Jarman here is not trying to write or devise a manipulation, also probably a poor word, but a feature to turn those people into allies. I think he's just, again, going back to the simplistic and the obvious, he's presenting a mirror. And I think people who watch this, who will go, God, them two gays, oh my God, why does he have to be gay? But the thing about it, with the interesting aspect, is he mirrors both of those story arcs. Everything that Edward II does, he takes an affair, he wants power, he wants his cake and wants to eat it, is the exact same thing Isabella does. She has an affair, she wants to take power, she's having a relationship out of wedlock. But the interesting aspect of that is, she's a woman, and she's having an affair with a man, whereas her husband is having an affair with a man. So which one do we demonise? Of course, people will look at the same-sex couple, we demonise it. Not we, not me and you, but an audience would do that. That's not right. It's not right. It's wrong. And then how Isabella, and then you look at her affair, that the army general, his sexual exploits or his fantasies are employed by the female form. But then we look, when the introduction of Gaveston, it's a very similar scene. We're on a bed. There's 4 people. There are 2 people in the background engaging with same-sex activities. There's a conversation on. But how he mirrors them, an audience will project an insecurity about one and an acceptance of the other. Fascinating. He never brings it up. He never highlights it aside from just presenting it on screen, but he constantly mirrors it. We look at one person who is demonized and is killed for it, and the other 2 are just imprisoned, probably presumably with later death. It's just very interesting how he presents it and lets the audience dictate that. How we present that. Do we accept that subconsciously? How do we see that? Do we villainize him and not her? It's an very interesting but simplistic presentation. And the one thing I think he does, just to go to your point, which not to contradict myself, but I think this is more so highlighted in the feature, is that this is not necessarily a film to dictate to those who are homophobic or along those cinnamons or anything like that. Like, I think this is a presentation to those, is that you think that Alan, who works at the store, who happens to be gay, you think they'll stop at him? This is the King of England, and they want him out. They exile him. You know, there's a weight to that, like a serious weight, like the homophobic, the rise of it, or just the inability to accept those who are different, regardless of what it will be, is it will not stop to exile those out of a society that they don't seem normal, regardless of who you are. And it's interesting when we see that the idea of cancellation now in the 21st century, like we go from horrific crimes to tweets, but we want the same thing. We want them out of the society, which is an interesting aspect to this in a different time of sexuality. Now it would feel like we're a little bit more lenient. That's from a white that's from a white straight man saying that. So I don't want that to come out of term and sound naive. But when you read about the 90s and fighting for rights, perhaps if we were asking someone of colour who was alive in the 60s and was alive now, is it better? You would presume someone would say yes, but that doesn't mean it's great. And I think that's probably the same here. I know I'm granted, I'm talking about two aspects of society that I do not belong to, so I do apologise for anyone out there if I'm speaking for them. But I think that it's an interesting one here, where it doesn't matter who you are. If you do not conform, you're out. And I think it's an interesting little bit of activism on his part to tell the people who are background, who especially in the activist sequence, the riot, is that you've got to fight for who you are, because if the King of England can't defend himself because of his sexual orientation, you ain't got a chance, because you'll be exiled from community. And small community England, very much like America, is paramount for getting jobs, for having a living, for having a rural acceptance of one another. Once you're considered, quote unquote, the black sheep, you are out. It's an aged old of time, and I think there's an incredibly rich exploit to dictate the fact of, if they come for you, it doesn't stop there. It will come for everyone, and you have to defend who you are. You've got to stand up for who you are. Sexuality shouldn't stop you getting a job. It shouldn't stop you being a part of a community because of who you lay next to at night. And I think that simplistic nature of it, and I know it's like, for someone who's not homophobic, it would seem that would be a normalization of society. But for those who unfortunately do not want to be able to function and accept those who are different, that would seem to be a diabolical existence for many. But I think it's just the simplistic factor of showing the not necessarily an irony, but a disturbing reality and a foreboding warning to those, a group of people who if it's a religious element or a political element, will not stop at nothing to ostracize those who are different. And I think it's the simplest aspect of that. I don't know how you feel about any of that, but it's the simplistic nature of it all here which works so much. And again, how one is sodomized for, quote unquote, sodomy, and the other two are imprisoned. It's an interesting one, isn't it? You've got. Do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the mathematician, the British mathematician. I can't remember his name. Is it who brought the Enigma machine?
The Imitation Game guy. Yeah.
Alan Turing, who not directly and not personally, but substantially changed the course of this world in figuring out something that no other man could do. By changing the direction of the war, by figuring out the Nazi Germany Enigma machine and decoding transcripts that would have surefire helped them win that war. A British legend, his result, chemically castrated. That is the world in the 1940s and 50s and 60s that we lived in. That is an appalling aspect. I mean, he's just been pardoned not recently. I think even in the 2010s or the late 2010s, he was pardoned, and that's what we've given back. You know, like it is a tragic indictment of, because I mean, what more can you do? You know, I don't know. You hear stories about like there was I'm not to digress here, but I think it's an important aspect of production. But you know, you hear stories of there was a couple whose child was in a car accident, and they wanted a heart transplant or something, and they found out like the donor was a gay man, lived with his husband, and they denied it, and the child died. I think it's like it might be an urban legend or myth or something. There's a tragedy in that, an absolute fucking tragedy, and I think that the representation of that on screen here is really brought forward in that. Trying to make these relevant. Don't get me wrong, I'm not just going on one, but I think it's an interesting thing of Derek Jarman to just put the reality forward and be like, they're just human beings. It just happens that he's a king, and I think that's where the richness of the narrative of the Shakespearean story comes into fruition. But the social context and the cultural dynamics of it are poignantly relevant today, frighteningly so.
It's also rich just to, I mean, again, it's pretty simple. It's on the nose, but like this has been a fight that's been going on all of history. Whenever there's been people, there's been this struggle. I hear a lot as a queer person that queerness is new, that this is a new fight, that this is something that started even in the 1900s, right? Like and you hear it now, like there's a lot you can, you know, make this conversation bigger. There are parents okay with their child dying of diseases just because they didn't get a vaccine, but they think that's worth it. Don't ask me. People saying that people with autism never existed before. When I was a child, no one had autism. No one was gay no one was trans when I was a child. When that's not obviously true in the slightest. And you look at this barbaric treatment where it's like, so many of them were institutionalized, so many of them were hospitalized. Mm-hmm. But this goes back to literally Edward II. This goes back to beyond Edward II, right? Like this is all stories and these are all narratives, and this is a fight that the queer community have had to continue to have, and something that we need to continue to push going forward, because these fuckers don't stop, and they really don't, and they really will continue to push and push and push. And I think it's so important to also be putting all that history together in a form like this. I think that's very poignant and very needed. I agree with that. I mean, everything you said, really. I mean, like this is, I mean, you kind of said it beautifully, but I think everything here works. I also just want to mention, though, you mentioned that there was a conversation where they just had gay sex in the background. I agree with your take that this is not for the homophobes, because pretty much nearly, you know, every other scene has just casual gay sex in the background. I think there is something about Jarman projecting this image very casually, very just like even a serious conversation, just in the background, people will be fucking. I think there's weight in that. I think there's power in that, right? Like I think it's really beautiful. I think it's an interesting projection. I also would love to get a little bit into the ending here, because the ending here again is very interesting, where you have this plan to get rid of Edward II, brutally murder him and hurt him, and then because this new Edward III, the kid, is going to take over, and he ends up imprisoning his mom, who masterminded this entire thing. Is interesting, and also specifically playing around with gender identity. Again, I think it's this little message of hope. Not that it's like it erases the tragedy of the scene, obviously, or the ending, but that queer people again will continue to exist, and you can't get rid of us. And this moment of liberation for this kid, I thought that was a very interesting way not that interesting is the best word for it, but I thought it was a very profound way, I guess, to end the film. Did you have any thoughts on the ending?
Human nature has moments in its lifespan where eradication happens. If it's genocide of ideas, of beliefs, religion, or people, there's a cycle, and attempted eradication always leads to resistance. We're seeing that now. Turn on the news. You see it mostly every other decade. The big one in the 40s. I'll leave that up to the people who can put one and one together. But often not on a very small idea, or however onto a very large one. Eradication always resolves to resistance. And when people try to get rid of something, however minute or large, there's a constant base of resistance that leads to education, however slim, hopeful, or delicate. There are words I want to use here, but I'm not going to say them because I think I shouldn't not say them. I should have said, but I just think it's a podcast for another time. But I'll simplify it in a different way. But there will be words used on the news that a child will watch with the father, the mother, whoever, their uncle, the brother, sister, whoever, the grandma, the granddad, auntie, whoever, and there'll be a question of what does that mean, and that person will say, well, it means this, or they don't know, but there'll be a conversation there, and that person who asked that question will then either accept the answer or go off, find something else, read up on about it, then make another judgment of it, and then in 5-6 years' time, that judgment will change, and you have an education on it. It's subconscious, it's conscious. It depends how that person reacts to it, and I think there's always this nature of wanting to find out more, and then resistance always often leads to an explosion of it coming to pass and having a second wind. And I think not to conflate the two because they're two very different things, but in the sense of human nature, I think that the fact that I think there's a factor of human nature where something is trying to be beaten down or eradicated. There's an interest there of why, and then there's an interest of, well, what does that mean then? And someone becomes absorbed into that. I think sexuality, and I think homosexuality, or just queerness, let's say, in adjacent, is an interesting one because first and foremost, it's it's indoctrined into a person as they're born. Okay, you can't erase that. You just can't do it. Aside from literally trying to do it and then doing making someone sterile, which has been multiple people have tried to do that, and queerness pushes through, just like a religion pushes through or an ethnicity will push through. Those people that will survive, there will be another tomorrow. And I think that it's an interesting telling of when we're all kids and there's something that your parents don't want to talk about, or they say, don't do that. What do you want to do? You want to do it. Don't jump in that in there. Don't jump in that pool. What do? You can jump in the pool, and you live and you learn. But on a more big note like this, you see a lot of schools down south in America not teaching people evolution, and those kids will be raised and they won't know anything about evolution, and they'll go somewhere on another day. They'll find an article as simple as this is for other people. Think, Jack, don't be so naive. It's a fact of life. They won't know what that is, and they'll come up against someone in an Ivy League school or a university or college, and they'll be like, "Oh, do you know who Isaac Newton is?" There'll be an implosion of like education. Again, subconscious or conscious, they'll either take it on or reject it, but there'll be that conversation. One out of 10, that person might walk away and go, right, interesting. That changes a bit of my belief system. It happens. It's a bit of faith we all got to have in our lives, and I think that this is an interesting establishment of that. In that you can try and eradicate it, but the more you do that, there's an equation that has to be balanced in life. I think if you push one way, I think the other way will push back. And I think that the end with Edward III is that the irony of them trying to eradicate it is only just allowing him to be engrossed with it more. The conversations, him seeing it, him being normalised with his father. In the first 10 minutes of the film, like he sat on Geverson's knees. There's no sexual innuendo about it. Just accepts him as someone his dad is with. His uncle and the king's brother. There's no issue there at all, aside from it being a difficult place to be in as a king of England. Being normalized into it. It's an interesting one because the threat of this film, like social culture, trying to eradicate sexuality or queerness, and under the nose, it's brooding more. And it'll happen now. That's why there's an influx of transphobia and transness, because there has to be an equation. It's like a rule of life. The more people on Fox News who talk about trans rights, the more people who will watch that and be like, trans, what does that mean? Again, they'll access that information and they'll go, "All right, okay, yeah, I don't like that." And then there'll be another part of it that go, "Fuck, that's the answer." It'll save some kids. It'll save some people. Like I saw TV Glow. However old you are, 10, 11, 12, 80, 90, there'll just be a switch where it'll be like, oh my God, sometimes the evil in this world or an opposing opinion will all level off, and there'll always be an opposite reaction for it. So anyone out there who's like scared to death about anything, look, I'm not a political I'm talking a lot on my arse here, but I'm just speaking from the heart anyway. But all those people who are often quite worried about what's happening in the world, I promise you, as someone who is 29, don't worry, I'm not. Maybe this is somewhat naive of me. I promise you, there will always be a tomorrow, regardless of who it'll be. A lot of us won't see that next sunrise, but I think whoever listens to that story will. He'll see a sunrise as bright as you've never seen it before. There's a beauty to that, and there's also a darkness to it. But I think this film really does engage with that sentiment, in that you can try destroy this, but you won't succeed. And I think there's a genuine poignancy and profoundness about that, especially with someone who at the time is at the end. If he accepts it or not, I'm not too sure. I'd have to read up about it. Does he know it? I presume so. I know. We all know at that time it's a death sentence. I think it's a tragedy in its own right that he's still sat there giving people a slither of hope of how tiny it is. It's still hope, knowing that he doesn't have long left. There's a very difficult notion behind that. One that sort of gives me chills, gives me like a physical reaction, that gives me sort of like goosebumps, makes me my throat swell up. I find that really poignant, really quite profound, and I can imagine directing this and then going to blue would be a really, really difficult fucking headache. One that is done with a genuine, tremendous layer of style, acceptance, suaveness to it, if that all makes sense. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's a very difficult watch, because I think if you watch this, it's like, well, everybody has a comeuppance, but it leads to a next generation. I think that's a slither of hope, is that you can, maybe you won't see the sunrise, a lot of us won't, but I think that next generation might just get the brightest one they'll get. So there's a beauty there, I suppose. Maybe that's not necessarily what he's going for, but it sure as shit hits as deep as that now, especially as, like 30 years later almost. Where I don't know what Jarman would have thought of now. I'm not too sure. I think he would have been absolutely repulsed by it. But is it better? It's not for me to say. There's a tough one, isn't it? I don't know.
I mean, progress does not equal perfection, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he's
right
so
now
good.
we're not in the middle of the AIDS crisis, right? I'll
Yeah,
gladly take that as a queer person, right? Very happy for that progress.
yeah,
Doesn't mean that we're not being sentenced to death for being gay right now, right? Like,
yeah.
there's been
It has a
progress,
hope, doesn't it?
right?
Yeah, he has a hope, and I think that's the way he's in his life. Then
Yeah.
that takes an incredible amount of
Yeah.
perseverance, I'll say.
And that's something he's played with throughout his filmography, is showing that duality of like, yes, there can be that progress, but also we're having the weight that someone died, a queer person. There's physical violence and death and bloodshed, and there has been. I think this is the best example of a film that really balances those emotional weights to where there is that hope and there is that promise for a tomorrow, and there is that queerness, especially queerness is going to live on because you cannot control queerness, right? Like, even when you look at, I think that's one of the more unique comparisons between this and, like, let's say various stages of ethnic cleansing, for example, is like queerness is not definable where you can just cut off queerness and then it be over with. Um, so I will acknowledge in the conversation that's a very different thing from some of
Can I
the
just
other
point something out there?
conversations we've mentioned. Yeah, go
Yeah,
for it.
I just point him out there as well. With the idea of that and the comparison as well, is that a lot of religious iconography is built into in a visualization. If it's wearing a hijab or a kippah, there's a visual identity there. With sexuality and queerness, it's been repressed a significant amount in terms of kiss or holding hands or being in public. You weren't allowed, and even today, like you see it, there's not an acceptance of visual personification of such. I mean, you have a flag behind you, wear it high and proud. Don't get me wrong, and fucking hell, do right. But we both know if that was outside on a flag, it would be different. And I'm not, don't, I love you to pieces. This is not something to say, don't keep it inside. Don't closet it. It's not at all like that. But it's an interesting one with the representation of sexuality on a visual level and that the other thing, because sexuality is often, it's demonized with the personification of queerness because it's not being well regarded, let's say, hasn't been accepted. And I think you mentioned as well brilliantly about the sexualization of the film. It's very much like full on male nudity. There's thrusting, there's texture. But the one thing which is very like apparent as well, it's very much like in your face, and so much it should be. But the one thing that he does brilliantly is like he does texture and he normalizes acceptance. And a lot of people won't sort of realize this but when him and Gaveston when they're in the suits and they have that little playful dance, like he kisses them on the lips like you would do a man and a woman, and it's gonna come across so fucking naive when I say this, but you don't really pick up on that because it's like and just a normal, uh, gentle depiction of affection that is same sex, non same sex, so on. But here it's like because to me again, I'm not a homophobe, so for me I don't really pick up on something like that. That's not something that's like, oh my god, did you see what he did there? I just like that doesn't, but you have to sort of look at this and you have to get in that mindset of like, right, if I didn't, if these types of texture, like he's doing something here, take myself out of what I feel accepted about and look at it as a point of view, which is from a different point of view, which is often a very dark place to be in, let me get me wrong. And you see things, it's like, oh, he's doing that. Like, it's just normal. And you have to sort of like brainwash yourself into looking at it in a very morbid sense of the way, which is not very healthy at all. But like it's texture like that, like caressing of the hair, just like so simple of a man and a woman where the hair goes back, but he's done it with same sex. Like it's just so simple but effective. Is like it's just normalized, and I think you have to put that into the social consciousness of acceptance for people just to get it. And that's why I think Pride is such an interesting thing because people go Pride Month. Why do you need a month to celebrate? It's not about. It is about a celebration. It's honouring those who came before it, like the Stonewall. Like drag queens are very important as well for that. But it's not just about that. It's about being open out there and letting people see people just dress how they want to, provocatively, don't get me wrong, but dress, holding hands, and being a bit zany for 28 days or 31 days. And I think it's that acceptance of someone just seeing it and being able to process it, and hopefully those people who are watching it are able just to accept it and move on. And I think it's the idea of just being able to get out there, and what this film does really well is just position itself into acceptance of normal, to just being normal to an audience that just don't then see it. I think that's a similar idea. I know that I'm reaching there. I do apologise. I know I interrupted you, so I'm so sorry. But I do think it's such an interesting thing with queer iconography, because even to now, it's like it just you can walk down a street. Well, I mean, no, you really can't in this country anymore. To be fair, that's such a crime. It's an interesting one how the two intertwine now: religion, iconography. If it's a hijab, a kippah, or a cross, um, or anything else, Hare Krishna even, and there's like, oh, what's that? And there's a question. Whereas you two gay men walking down the street, or two lesbians, or a trans person, or people are non-binary. There's always that conversation, stuff like that. There has to be an acceptance of it. But the more you see it, the more it gets accepted into social conscious. You would hope, anyway. And I think this film is really interesting. I hope I've not derailed your point there, because I just wanted to say that, but I'm sorry.
No, I thought it was beautiful. Honestly, I don't even remember what point I was making. I'll just say that. No, but it was beautiful. I'm happy you did it. I don't think it was that important what I was saying. What I also say is, like, I guess in a conversation of Pride Month, it's interesting because, like, it is with queerness specifically such a constant choice of, like, you have the coming out process daily, right? No matter where you can be in an Uber and you have to say if you're gay or not when they ask you, do you have a girlfriend, right? Like, you constantly are weighing the factors and constantly making the choice of, like, am I going to identify as gay or not? So yes, my pride flag in here is very different than it was outside. Whether it's, outside in general, no matter what kind of queerness you're presenting, you're making a choice there. But I do think that is something this film creates pretty profoundly. I think wrapping up, I really am in awe of this feature. I think that this is a film that, again, is Jarman just like at his best. I think there is so much here. Again, on paper, I can see why someone would come away from this thinking it's basic. But as I think we've demonstrated throughout the last hour, there really is a lot more thought and a lot more meaning here. I think especially for a Pride watch, highly recommend you watch this June if you're really diving into queer cinema. An act of revolution, undoubtedly, from an artist who is literally on, at the end of his career, at the end of his life, and he knows that. And he's going through those emotions. And I think very few, not just filmmakers, not just artists, but people in general would have the attitude and have the mindset in that moment to make something so clear and so poignant and so emotional. It's sad. It is hopeful. It is tender. Some of the most tender queer romance, as you mentioned, that, like, I've ever seen. And I'm also someone who, like, obviously I am queer, so I necessarily, like, physical queerness on screen is not something that necessarily I'm like, wow, holy shit, look at what they're doing. That's crazy. Very similar to you, I guess, even probably more deeply for me. But still, just like such tender moments, and even moments. There's a great scene where they go confront him when they're working out, and they say, "Why does Edward love you?" And he's like, or why does Edward think you deserve this? And he loves me more than he loves anything in the world. And just like little statements like that, they just hold on. That just has this poetry that I think a lot of queer romance doesn't necessarily get, especially from this era. I think especially, like, again, putting this in context of today, super relevant, but super impressive for today. When you go in with the mindset of this is early 90s in this governmental system, it's remarkable. I really think it's like a masterpiece. What are your thoughts? Final thoughts?
I'm going to go on a slight rant here, and it's nothing to do with a film I'm going to mention later, but it's going to be an issue of the studios. This film comes out at a time, because of its discourse, for a constituency in government, and also, you could say, prominently a social discourse or a conversation that rejects Jarman in this film. If it's studios or whoever, it would have done very well in the independent, but I think with it getting to cinemas and it being a loud and proud feature, I think we both can presume it wasn't very much allowed into the masses. if this film came out now and Jarman was alive now, the same studios and the same audiences would eat this shit up, because the one thing that reminded me of it was the tragedy of Macbeth, which I think, looking at him back and forth, like Joel Cohen clearly took major inspiration from this, specifically in set design. And I think you look at this and how powerful it is, and how like it's like very nondescript. It's very much on the nose, and I think it doesn't really need to be hiding anything. It's like it is what it's about. It's very clear. I think studios would still not be able to touch this. I think if they made it now, I think it would be far less impacting. Although there's a prominence there. Don't get me wrong, but it's interesting when you look at this and look at the stuff now, and I'm like, I think A24 would like take this, rip its guts out, and then just like present it. I think this is at a time where you get the melding of the time being horrifically right, and also from a filmmaker that needs to take a stand. It doesn't feel corporate. It feels like, I need to make this, and I'm going to make it with my friends. We're going to do it how I want to do it, and I'm not bothered what anyone thinks. And it's been, because it's a very well regarded filmmaker and a very well regarded property. It's obviously lived very long, but ultimately the work in itself has incredible amounts of legs to it. I feel like now it would be corporatized to a point where it would miss the meanings. And it reminded me like when Roland Emmerich did the Stonewall film, and I'm like, queer filmmaker, queer film. Why is that not hitting the heights that it should be making? Why are we regulated to like the independent market? Like you said, like The Wedding Banquet not so long ago, and Bros. I think Bros is the one where got the middle ground. I think we both really like Bros as well, like the middle ground of it. But it's always like regulated to like comedy or in the independent market. I think it's just staggering to know that like 30, 35, almost 40 years to the point now. And I just think to myself, what this would be like now, and I think it lives so long. It's so powering. It sort of just shocks me that it'd be so interesting to know if Derek Jarman could get this made now. I think that's an indictment of itself to where we are. Would he be able to get this made now? And it's just that perfect, where the time, it's not perfect. I have to say that it's sort of this terrible reality where like a bitter irony of being in a situation that's so jarring and so damning, that the art is so rich. And we look at things now, and we're in a very similar time of political, social segregation, ethnic cleansing, like transphobia is on the rise. Like, it's fucking everywhere, And where are these filmmakers? Where is it? The studios? Is it? I know there's. I saw the TV Glow, and I know there's the Wachowskis, but like Warner Brothers have like just totally fucked the Wachowskis over. They can't. And I know that Lily's going to go in production with a really poignant film, which is coming out this year. I know that Lily Wachowski's going to do. Lana Wachowski's going to do some other stuff, but for so long they've tried to meld queerness into the contemporary social discourse, and they can't do it. They just cannot do it. They just can't put it in Star Wars. They can't put it in Disney. And I think with the eradication of the independent market, it just sort of like, you look at this and it's quite worrying. It's generally quite worrying. I know that I promise you I would not go on a fucking nasty like, oh, cinema's dead. But it's just interesting to note, like, I think that we need to have the Derek Jarman's back. I think we need to. I so hope that in the next 5-6 years we'll get filmmakers who are politically charged, and I hope that Neon A24 will take those risks. But even then, that like A24 buying like the Halloween franchise or Friday the 13th, it just fills me with so much dread, because those were the hopes. Like the BFI, like even Luca. I think Luca's the one who was like, like queerness and getting contemporary, but also being independent. I think he's probably the last great one who can do all three. Getting challenges on the screen now. You've got to make that contemporary. You've got to make that social discourse. You've got to make it pop culture. And I think Jarman didn't get that, and it's still so profound. The artistry there is like so good. But then even Luca, like with Queer with Daniel Craig, it just it's an interesting. It's like the last bastion. I'm sorry. I know I'm not naming quite a few. I'm that's probably an issue of mine. But it's an interesting one of like you've got to put it into retrospect now. Like we're talking about getting a Disney queer character. Back then, you can have a boyfriend if you were gay. It's such a different climate. And I think you've got to put it in perspective of how much Jarman like just put it on the line. Like queerness was not a tone or a sideshow to his filmmaking prowess. It was him. He wore it on his like he was incredibly proud to be queer. And I think now, I think people are not proud to be queer, not proud to be allies. I think people are just scared. I think people are scared to be allies. People and alloy metals. No, allies. And I think queer filmmakers are scared to indulge queerness because there's a corporate capitalism to it where we don't need to make money. We do need another day here. And that's sort of the tragedy in its right. But I look back on this and I think what he achieved here on such a minuscule budget. That's the tragedy of Jarman is that he died before he was 60, and there was so much more left. I think it'd been so interesting to see him on a digital, like him in the digital revolution, like what he could have achieved going on there, like just making stuff for incredibly tight budgets with Tilda as well and whoever he was working with, like working class performers like the Sean Beans of his time. Jerome Flynn's in this. It's a tragedy in its own right, but in the tragedy, there's embers of a candle blaming twice as bright, not twice as long. Not to get into the blame or anything there, but looking back at this, it's just I'm so keen to unravel Jarman. I cannot wait. It's going to be so interesting to read about him, and all of that. But again, like I love this. It's so good, and it's going to be a tragedy because I know I'm going to watch this and be like, Blue, yeah, but it's not as good as Edward II. But this was so good. This was such a really key point here. And anyone out there listening, if you can get this is actually on YouTube as well. Brilliant copy of it. Not that it's a copy, but a brilliant restoration of it. But go out and seek the BFIs if you can. The box set is absolutely gorgeous, both 1 and 2. They're actually beautiful to look at. But go out and watch his films. Go out and watch this because there's a lot here. Like if you like cinema and you like Tragedy of Macbeth, you like the minuscule model of less says more, or just someone who's like in like again for the Pride Month stuff who wants to watch something a little bit different but incredibly rich. Perfect chat. Perfect viewing to watch. So yeah, brilliant, tremendous piece of filmmaking from Derek Jarman.
So highly recommend if you are listening and you've not seen the film. What are you doing? You should go see this by this point. I think we both highly recommend it. With that, we're going to go to our question of the week because, again, this is our beginning of Pride Month here. We have a few different films we're going to talk about throughout the month, but we're going to start with our question of the week, which is just giving some recommendations for Pride Month. Ideally, probably not like the biggest films that I'm sure everyone knows about, but if there are any recommendations you have that tackle queerness in some way or from a queer artist that you would like to recommend to the people at home. Jack, I will let you answer first.
This is a tough one. But, there's a simple one here. I'm going to say because we both love him, but we have said it enough, and I'll say a few others, but I'll just give one. Anyone got there? John Waters. Get it done. We like Nick is like a massive fan of him, and Nick was like, "Oh yeah, I'm watching some." I was like, oh, "I have to watch this." And I watched a few of it and was like, "I'm liking this a lot more than I thought it would be." Because I was like, I thought it was like a trash filmmaker. Like, not that he was like a rubbish filmmaker, but like a trashiness of it. And then I watched Cecil B. Demented, and I was like, "Carson, you need to watch this." And then you got the fix for it. And then I've watched like Serial Mom. I've watched everything. such a good filmmaker, and then Divine as well. We spoke about Divine on here as well, like Pink Flamingos and stuff like that. Mondo Trasher, like fabulous, like companionship. I'm going to mention the Wachowskis, like perhaps the most important sleeper trans allegory in a very strange way that's come about, but nevertheless so poignant to watch, especially the resurrections. I've got to stand the Wachowskis. Watch Paris is Burning. What an education that was for me I think not last year, but the year before, December, I did documentaries. Was relatively like aware of what it was on the Criterion. I know that it was about drag queens, but like, there's some education there. Not only on listening to drag queens in like the 70s and 80s and just talk about their like lives, but also to get into the underground social like houses and stuff like that. Because like, I know who RuPaul is, and my wife, like, we watch RuPaul. Like, I quite like RuPaul. I think it's quite fun, the TV show. I know that RuPaul is quite divisive as a character, but the TV show in itself is quite fun. And going into like and listen to the houses in New York and seeing how like not only defensive it is, but this is not a game. Like, this is livelihood, and walking that catwalk one is a make or break for identity or just acceptance. So that is definitely one. Another one, Kokomo City. We spoke about it. I spoke about this a few weeks ago. I watched it for Women in Film, which would have been in March. Didn't know much about it. Black and white. The trans experience from African American point of view. Whew. Poignant, educational. Yeah, there's all those buzzwords. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to say these a lot, but it fucking like so interesting about being black in a community that doesn't accept you in a rural area, and then being trans and black in a society that doesn't. That the black community doesn't accept you being trans, and vice versa. And then the issues there, and then knowing that one of the subjects was killed, shot in a hotel room, like not so long afterwards. The filmmaker, I think. Pre-transition was an incredibly like well-respected media mogul within like music design. Pushed to the sides, wasn't he's not even accepted anymore. Fascinating. And there's another one that I want to mention that I don't think is ready available just yet, but I'm really excited to watch it. Is I'm Your Venus, which goes back to the Paris is Burning, which is a drag queen called Visas Extravaganza. And I wouldn't have watched this purely because it's very hard to get. I know it was at a few film festivals last year, but this is about a drag queen who is murdered in the middle of production of Paris is Burning, who is like 18, 19, who is talking about these realities of going into a hotel room to earn money because what is left? What else can they do? And they're telling this interviewer, yeah, it's dangerous and I could die. And then all these drag queens around her are saying, it's so dangerous. And what happens? One night they just don't go home, and they're found, shot to death. A tragic reality of the community trying to support itself through sex work, which then leads into a film that me and you watched not so long ago. Oh my god, I can't remember what it was. It was a. Can you remember it about
The Stroll?
Yes, I'll end on that. Watch that. Those three films intertwine incredibly well. Kokomo City, Paris is Burning, and The Stroll. They're all under 90 minutes. Very educational, which is important in these conversations. Direct, feisty, nasty, humorous, entertaining, highly immersive, and really engaging. Watch that. And then there's also a film from 1968 called The Queen. I'm going to watch this June. Yeah, we haven't even spoke about that, but I'm excited to see that as well. I hope that's not too long of a list, but watch those films. They're very fun films to watch because they're so engaging. I mean, excited if you're a fucking homophobe or something. I just at the screen like that all the time. I don't know, but for me, I was like, it's just a subculture that is so fascinating. It's like Doom, House Atreides, House this. Like it's just so interesting to me to like just like as someone who's naive to it, it's fascinating. But I'm excited to know yours.
I think that's the straightest thing I've ever heard anyone say. It's like Dune. Yeah. Okay. The Queen is a great the Queen is a great film to put in that conversation. Also with those documentaries you mentioned. I wanted you to go first because I have like a huge list. I'm going to go very quickly just because I know I've talked about a lot of these on rapid reviews or just kind of generally on the podcast. The Delta, fantastic little queer drama about a white teenager who starts to see a Vietnamese immigrant in the middle of, where are they? I think it's Tennessee. Very interesting perspective for that film. Very slice of life, but very impactful. Luca Guadagnino's Queer. I know it's newer. It's a newer release, but I think a lot of people overlook this and didn't see it during award season and just kind of don't seem interested by it. We had a great conversation. Highly recommend everyone check out our conversation on Death by or Anatomy of an Adaptation on the film. Super meaningful, profound look at queer aging, queer loneliness. Daniel Craig is fantastic here. The fact that he didn't get a Best Actor nomination is my Joker's origin story. But I think this is one, like, everyone loved Challengers, and I love Challengers also. But Queer is like so worthwhile to check out. Short Bus from John Cameron Mitchell. This is my favorite of his films, and he has a great filmography. This is such a fun slice of life look at New York City post 9/11. A lot of sex, a lot of sex. If you're not okay with just sex in general, of all forms and types and people and bodies, definitely don't check this one out. Maybe. But I heard that I love it. I think it's his masterpiece. Bros, you mentioned it during the podcast. Warms my heart. I watch it every single year. If you want, just like, I know in some ways it's a very simple romantic drama, and that's the point of this, is that it's trying to do that for the queer audience. But then there's also so much weight here about the queer identity. I think Billy Eichner, people are sleeping on his performance here. I wrote a whole article in anger about the actual reaction to this movie, but his performance here, there's a scene on the beach that I just see so clearly. That's one of my favorite scenes maybe of all time, where he's talking about the relationship with his parents. There's so much here about the weight of the queer identity, living in the modern time where we have so much progress, but we're still fighting for more equality. But at the same time, we have the weight of what's happened to us in the past, especially with the AIDS crisis, and how we have to deal with the weight of so many individuals not being here. It's tragic. It's heartbreaking. It's funny. It's hysterically funny. Super good. Highly recommend. Good Grief on Netflix. Another one everyone slept on except for us, Jack. Looking at a man whose husband unexpectedly dies, and he is dealing with that grief and trying to find a way forward. Profoundly sad. Again, Dan Levy, great here. Very similar to Billy Eichner. There is these actors who are known for comedy who go into films, and the films have some comedy, and then it just seems like nobody can focus on like their dramatic work and their emotional work in the film. He's stunning here. This film is so emotional. I was heartbroken by this. It randomly released on like the second week of January on Netflix. I have no idea why they released it just with no hype at all, but I think it's genuinely incredible. For John Waters, we did a Patreon review for this, but Female Trouble, I think, is probably his most overlooked work. Really great feature. But as you mentioned, all of his films, so queer, so camp. Go read his book also. He does the audiobook for Liarmouth or whatever that one is called. Highly recommend that. And then we danced. This was a great little from international feature from 2019, I want to say. Very, again, if you don't like gay sex, don't watch the movie. Don't watch any of these movies, I guess, if you don't like gay sex. But super lovely little romance film. If you want like a new international romance, highly recommend. National Anthem from 2023, a great look at queer healing and how queer spaces can be healing for explorations with gender identity and sexuality identity. Will and Harper, if you have a family and you want to show them something for Pride Month, specifically with the trans experience in mind, but they're kind of like, a little bit, they're supportive, but they don't necessarily understand the experience, and you don't want anything that's too radical for them. Will and Harper, I think, is a great choice for a documentary. It's very fun, but it has some moments of just profound sadness that is just, it hits you like a fucking freight train. Vietnam, I will end. Oh, actually, I have two more. Vietnam from last year, Vietnamese drama about two coal miners who form a romantic relationship and plan to travel across seas for work. Very slow. There's a lot here. You have to do a lot of reading about like Vietnam and the politics of Vietnam to fully understand this. I went right. I literally ran across the theater. I saw this at AFI Fest from my screening of O Canada with a Q&A with Paul Schrader. Literally ran to the theater. I was the last one in before the show started and then closed the doors. But just a beautiful, beautiful film. And then finally, we talked about this, especially with Nick on this podcast a lot, the work of Jean Couture, specifically Blood of a Poet, 1932. To this day, with everything I've seen, probably the most profound work and artistic work at the soul of being a queer artist. How when you create art and you're queer, you cannot hide it and it shows up everywhere. And you cannot escape that point of view living as a queer person. So profound and so, so good, so imaginative. But really, again, his entire filmography, and on this podcast between Patreon and normal episodes, myself and Nicolo Grasso have covered every single one of his works, I believe. Jump into that filmography. It is so, so rich. But that's my list. I mean, there's so much good queer cinema and there's so much I haven't seen that I'm excited to see. But I'm happy to hopefully share some interesting ones with those at home. With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. Jack, I will turn it over to you. What have you been watching this week?
I'll start with enemy number one. I don't know why I watched this. I just want to watch something new, and I was like, oh, I watched Death of a Unicorn. Jesus, honestly, that has got to be AI endorsed. There's no fucking way on this planet that's made by human beings. It's a concoction of like either AI generated ideas of what will work, or there's four idiotic people in a room thinking like, oh, let's make this, let's make that. I mean, it's atrociously shot. It's atrociously made. No one comes out of that without a script whatsoever. Like they're all dented. Paul Rudd, Will Poulter, Richard E. Grant, Tia Leone, and God forbid Jenna Ortega. She might be the. I said this in my review, but she might be the it girl. But like she is making consequential work at the moment, which to me showcases that she doesn't have range. Oh my God! Like what is she doing recently? Like that film with Martin Freeman. This Beetlejuice probably just got her away from it. I know that the Wednesday Addams thing is like a big thing, but like, dear me, like the choices that she's deciding to do here is like it's just atrocious. So I was absolutely disgusted watching it. I'm gonna leave the best till last anyway. I don't know if I spoke that I watched Alto Nights. I'm gonna review it for the site, the Robert De Niro dual role. I'm not going to mention a lot about this. I liked it, although it's severely underbaked. There's two things that was like so abundantly clear. Number one, that's meant to be a TV miniseries on HBO Max. Sorry, HBO. And also, it was so clear that's written for him and Pesha. So clear because he's basically doing an impression of it as the other character. These are going to get bad now. I watched for the site. Another Simple Favor, which should be in your queer list, Carson. Let's be honest, because there's some stuff in there, this one, where I'm like, I went to go watch the first film in Chicago with my mother-in-law, and it was like, this is horrific. This is horrific. I'd sat through Ghostbusters with her as well, watching it. I was like, Paul, like, what are we doing here? Like, Feig or Fee, like. Well, because Spy is quite good, but then and Bridesmaids, I don't know. That's a bygone era to me. But Simple Favor is like, oh, this is not it. Oh, this one's bad. Like it's shot on green screens. Blake Lively is actually quite good in it. I think of fashion. I think the costume is impeccable, but everything else here is like comatose. It's not interesting. It's not engaging. There's a twist in here that it's so comatose and boring. It's like you can tell it's like written as a pulpy book to get like middle aged women read it and go, oh, have you read this? It reminds me of like the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. Like people like whips. Oh my god, blindfold. Like it's just like you need to get out there, people. Like if that's something that like shocks you, and the 50 Shades of Grey was like, yeah, this one is like he's just doing that to be like shocking. It has no substance, but I'll save that for the review. I'm going to leave the worst one last because I've got a bone to pick with you on this. Um, in preparation for watching Pain is Wick or Wick is Pain, the documentary about the John Wick thing, I watched Chapter 3, Parabellum. God, I love those films. The editing, the flow, the blocking, it's seamless. It looks so good. Keanu Reeves is so good on them. Chad Stahelski, the Wachowski protege. I've got to mention it. I'm sorry. It's Pride Month. I just thought it was. I love those films. I haven't been able to watch the fourth one since me, you, and Nick did it. Purely because it's like that film gets me for some reason. It's a gut punch. Like it's such a fucking horrible film about grief in a film, an action film. Like Resurrections is a film about grief in a different way. That it's very very far beyond the time, and I think Stelzner does a good job. But Parabellum was really good. I watched it at the cinema with my wife, and a big like fake IMAX screen. Tremendous. This is the penultimate one. I watched it complete unknown. I'm not a Bob Dylan fan per se, like a lot of some stuff, but I'm not like deep cuts. Like I don't really like his usual stuff. I liked it. I think James Mangold, that's his name, isn't it? I hope it's fucking James Mangold. It is, yeah, because he did it in Indiana Jones and 310 to Yuma and Fraud for a Ferrari. Very, very like great filmmaker. Just like his use of the camera is really good. It was an interesting one because there's a lot to take away from that film in tone of, is he an arsehole? Did it just come too easy with him? And there's that really good interview that he did with the interview was like, oh, it was like, oh, one day, like when you're young, you can just that just came to me. He's like, can you do it now? And he's like, I don't think I can. And it's like the acceptance of knowing that time is finite, and also that sometimes it can come quite easy to a lot of people, and you see a lot in sports. Like so many people when you're younger are gifted at sports, and they just don't apply themselves. And I think like it reminds me of Inside Llewellyn Davis, where that guy's like wanting it so much and he's so talented. But sometimes life is just it does not reward those who have the talent and or the drive, but just gives it to those who perhaps are very talented but don't really want the limelight. It's just it's an interesting film. I really enjoyed it. But the best to last, and I told you on the last podcast I was going to watch this, and it pissed me off immensely. I watched Screamboat. Jesus wept. You and Paul were not harsh enough on that podcast. I don't know. There's either you two were bullshitting about that, or you two were like purposely being quite affectionate to that film. Oh my god, I could not sit through that. I finished it, an hour and 40 minutes. It felt like 3 hours. Oh my god, like it. Seriously, I listened to the whole thing of the podcast. I even listened to the spoilers. I was like, I'm going to watch this shit. I'm fascinated, and I was like, I might have to watch this because Carson wasn't as damning as I thought. And even Paul wasn't. Paul, because Paul says like he likes like schlocky horror. I was like, well, I'll give it a go. And I watched it. And I was like, oh my god, you two bastards! Because you two did not. You did not die. You did not. Be honest. It is dire, gang. It is dire. Like the guy who plays the terrifying it, like what you could have just had a stand in. I just thought like it wasn't funny, it wasn't engaging, it wasn't very well devised. I know it was cheap, but like it was just like, and Paul was right about the gore. There's stuff in them like, why are you not cutting away? Cut away, cut away. Like we're watching a guy get his head sawed off. It wasn't like fun horror as well. It was like very nasty, and he was right about it being like there's like blatant levels of misogyny here as well, and I'm laughing not because it's funny, because it's like it's so obvious, it's so dire. But I honestly, it took me 2 sittings. I'll be honest. I watched 45 minutes of it, and I was like, "Oh my god, we're almost there." I was like, "Oh no, I've got an hour left." Like, fuck that. I'll come back to it. And I came back to it, and I wish I wouldn't have done. I wish I would have just had my mind thinking about what happened next to it. It was dire. I won't be watching that Winnie the Pooh thing. I won't be watching the Peter Pan thing, and I won't be watching Bambi, and I won't be watching the Universe, Blood and Honey Universe. I'm wanting out for that. It was bad. It was so bad, Carson. And to say that you're going to watch more of them, honestly, you need to stop that. I'm cutting in now, and you're telling me not to watch these Netflix stuff. You need to stop watching that shit because it's poison. It's not good for the health.
We all have our we all have our vices, right?
Yeah, sure.
I also will say, I think on the podcast we said don't watch it, but
no, to be fair, yeah, you were pretty upset about it. You were like, yeah, these are not good films. I was like, well,
you also need to watch The Mousetrap right before it, because that's like so garbage that in comparison, this one maybe shines a little bit brighter because it is just a movie. But I would not defend Screamboat too much, I'll be honest. So valid. But I'm happy you watched it. Keeping up with those new releases.
Yeah.
Cannes is happening right now, and it sounds better probably than Eddington does. So, like, you know what? I hope you, live with your choices.
One of us is a fan of Beau is Afraid. The other one isn't. We're not going to go there. But I'll give Editing a go. I'm sure. I'm sure it'll be marvelous. I can't wait for it. But Screamboat, not for me. Not for me. And
I will say genuinely, I think Screamboat's a better movie than Beau's Afraid. I'll say that wholeheartedly.
Carson, stop. We've had a night. It's late. But that's just silly talk. I'm not gonna honour that buffoonery. That's just silly talk. But these films make money as well.
Yeah. Keeping horror alive.
I think all three of us have given something to that film that I don't think deserves.
We can't get back.
Okay, I was like, I'm glad. I don't think I could have dealt with that.
Well, you watched it, I guess.
Yeah. I felt like emotional. Yeah, and why did I watch it though? I didn't need to be on the podcast. I was like, well, maybe it might be good. Like, it might be interesting because Paul really sold it. It's like I don't like schlocky horror, but these I know he says I like schlocky horror. I don't really like the strong stuff, but sometimes I like a really bad horror film. And I was like, oh well, I'll watch some of that. Watching some Vincent Price stuff, a bit campy. It's not too bad. Maybe it'll be. I don't know. Oh no. Anyway, on that note,
yeah, I'll jump to my releases. I watched Drop, fucking atrocious.
Oh, wow.
Same director as Happy Death Day and Freaky.
London, yeah.
I know a lot of people love his work. I don't vibe with him in general, but I thought this was really particularly bad for his filmography. Him and what is their names? Radio Silence, who did the new Scream films and did Ready or Not. Like that, I just do not vibe with these horror filmmakers, and I know a lot of people do, and I don't know what it is, but I cannot get into their films. I thought Abigail's weak. I think both of the new Scream films are weak. It's not for me. Clown in a Cornfield was fine. Shout out Chris Santon for bullying me to watch this movie. It was a fine slasher. It was completely average. I watched Final Destination Bloodlines, which ruled, I will say. Have you seen the movie?
No, I didn't know if we were going to do it this episode. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll buy my ticket Sunday morning. I was like, I need to check the schedule, and you're like, oh, it's Edward. This thing. I was like, oh, I'm slightly glad about that because I wanted to watch this. But it's getting really rave reviews here.
It is my favorite Final Destination film. I think it absolutely gives everything you'd want.
Carson, is that a high bar?
It's not always a high. No, it's not that high of a bar. But I will say, I think Final Destination 5, I'll also mention because I rewatched all of them ahead of this film. I think Final Destination 5 is also great. But this clears 5 for me. I think this has some really, really fun deaths, really fun lore. It gives everything I think you would want from this. I cannot imagine a Final Destination film being much better than this. But I'm very fascinated what you will think. Finally, I watched Bring Her Back, the new film from the duo that made Talk to Me. Did you see Talk to Me?
No.
Oh, that's surprising. Okay.
Yeah. No, go on, because I'm
no.
Go on.
I will say I like Talk to Me. Didn't love it, liked it a lot. This film, a big step down. I wish I had they gave me a fake tooth that's actually floss. It's not a good movie. Very gross. I will say one of the grossest horror movies I've seen in quite some time. I got nauseous actually during some of the violence, which is very rare for me in the cinema. Pretty boring. Definitely the third act. I'm like very certain there was a lot of rewrites here. It's not a satisfying conclusion. It's one of those films where like weird stuff kind of is happening and you're building and building and building. And just, it's a very weak third act, I found. I think the performances are good. Sally Hawkins is great here. Really, I've never seen her give like a horror performance like this. She is wonderful. Billy Barrett, I believe his name is. He plays one of the kids in this. That's very good. It is very suspenseful. It definitely gets on your nerves. But in the end, I thought it was a pretty weak effort, and I'm pretty sad to say that, considering I think Talk to Me showed a lot of promise. It feels in some ways, and this is going to be way more venomous than I mean it to sound. It sounds like Neil Blom. It reminded me of Neil Blomkamp's sequel or second film. I think it was Elysium, right?
Yeah.
Where like District 9 was so inspired and it was so exciting, and it's like, oh, I can't wait to see what he does next because I'm sure it's just going to go up from here. And then he just stales out and it's like, oh, what are we doing? It felt to me, again, not as bad as Elysium. I think Elysium is like a 1 star for me. It felt like that though in direction, so I was pretty disappointed, but I'm hopeful other people like it. I guess like, if you like gore, there's a lot of gore, so that's good. With that, I think that's gonna do it for today's episode. Jack, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on X, Twitter. I don't post on there. You can find me with that and Letterboxd with the same username at Jak-Luke Sharp. I'm just finished in my April goals. I've watched all of it. I'm just putting reviews on. Doing reviews of this. I'm going to be on Death by Adaptation, Anatomy of Adaptation shortly. With, I don't know if he's announced it yet. I don't say, but it's something Wachowski related, so I can't wait. Nick's going to get 2.5 hours of me talking shite. And then I'm going to do Pride Month on Letterboxd as well. A few films that you've mentioned I love to do. Jarman's going to be big on it. I'm going to finish a few. I think I've got one John Waters film I want to get on there as well to just finish off. And then, yeah, I'm going to do, hopefully that Amio Venus comes out and I can watch that as well. I'm looking forward to it. Might see if I can get a screener from someone else. I'll have a look. But you can find me at Jak-Luke Sharp. You can find me on Clapper LTD with a few reviews. A Working Man, Black Bag, Heart Eyes, Another Simple Favor will be dropping soon. Stuff like that. And it's going to be interesting what we do the next few weeks. And here's how you've got a great lineup going on, so I can't wait.
Thank you. I forgot to mention this earlier during our question of the week. In the description, I'm going to put Hillary White for that Pride special we did back in 2020, which I actually do recommend people listen to. I thought it was a quite poignant episode. And to be clear, hosting was put on Jack very last minute. So it's not like he orchestrated all this. Just, I guess, you probably don't know this listening at home. We don't have that context, so FYI. But Hillary White for that put together a watch list of Pride films that were quite lesser known. And just in general, if you want obscure but really, really solid cinema, go check out Hillary White's Letterboxd. I mean, it's filled with so much greatness. But she has a great list for that, so we'll put that in the description also. You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Can reviews coming out, a lot of reviews coming out actually, but that's good. It's nice to be a little bit back into the writing grind. And again, Pride Month is gonna be fun on here. Jakob Flash is joining, talk about Greg Arky's The Living End, which is pretty cool. And just some fun stuff. Also, like new releases, as you mentioned, Mission Impossible. We sadly will not be reviewing Ballerina from the story of John Wick or whatever it's called. I had to make the executive decision and cancel that one. But there's still a lot of good stuff coming out. So I hope everyone sticks around for all that. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.